So many years ago, in a galaxy far, far away, we was greeted to Metal Gear Solid 2 in 2001. Little did we know at the time how relevant it would become in our terrible modern society. Aside from its mind-bending story that caused PTSD all round,
Snake, what's happening around here?
left us questioning our identity,
Who am I really?
it brought a level of details that most video games can't even present today. From its character models, environments, gunplay, even to its eccentric bosses, such as a guy who loves roller skating and his idea of partying is blowing things to smithereens.
It's time to start the party!
To a Russian chick who needs a shave, to the crying, self-loathing, suicidal emo chick with daddy issues.
Cheated out of death again? How long will you force me to live?
A freaky bisexual vampire who loves licking questionable things off knives.
No, vamp isn't for vampire, it's because he's bisexual.
Hello, faggot lovers everywhere.
And yes, Big Boss himself. Well, kinda.
I'm the boss to surpass Big Boss himself. Big Boss! No. They're not Big Boss.
And an AI that controls the world, trolling the audience to the very end.
I'm not home right now. Please leave a message after the beep.
Beep! That's a big checklist, right? We've had VR missions and many other things. And if that couldn't get any better, a year later or 2 years later, depending on your region, MGS2 Substance brought us, well, substance in abundance. It contained the main Metal Gear Solid 2 game, along with more subtle alterations, including new infrared effects for the thermal goggles, additional cutscenes, and a new set of dog tags, as well as the inclusion of the boss survival and casting theatre modes that were missing in the North American version of the original game. Why do you guys always get it the worst? But that's all common knowledge. Now, I'm not saying this isn't too, but I kinda feel this part of MGS2 doesn't get mentioned as much, as it doesn't offer anything in terms of playing the main game, but it really has some epic features on board. It's almost like a sneak peek into the early stages of MGS2's history and design. Not to mention some awesome artwork by Yoji Shinkawa. Anybody who loves mechs, robotronics, cybergenetics merged with biological features, this is your kind of porn. It's none other than the document of Metal Gear Solid 2. Basically an interactive making of documentary released for the PlayStation 2 on September 12, 2002 in Japan and September 24th of the same year in North America. And this was a standalone title. However, it did not receive a standalone European release. The disc was packaged in the initial PAL release of the PlayStation 2 version of Metal Gear Solid 2 Substance for no extra charge, to compensate for both games' delayed releases. But since we're here, why not check out some of the really neat features it had? First up is the character model screen, which allows you to view characters within the game in great detail. Speaking of details, the level of quality is just insane. The PlayStation 2 could roughly push 20 to 30 million polygons per second in theory, but real-world games often average far less due to the hardware's bottlenecks, especially with lighting and physics and AI competing for these resources. Main character models in MGS2 were built with about 6,000 to 7,000 polygons, which was incredibly high for 2001. By comparison, most PS2 games at the time had character models closer to 1,500 to 3,000 polygons. Solid Snake's transformation from the PS1 days is a huge leap. Interestingly, in this document showcases Snake in all his earliest designs in a free model based off Yoji Shinkawa's art. Snake looks very similar to his MGS1 model with the same shorter hair, but the outfit seems more reminiscent of the earlier MSX games. Moving on to the next slide, we get Snake in his raincoat. We see him wear at the start of the tanker chapter. This model has a set animation of him walking or running when you switch poses. And this is usually the case for most of the characters you can view. And finally, Snake in all of his sneaking suit glory with a longer mullet, just like Big Boss. A neat feature on this character menu is the ability to equip some of the character's accessories. With Snake, you can place on the infinite bandana, and some glasses, cigarettes, and his USP. It's a great feature we would go on to see throughout the series from MGS4 and onwards into Peace Walker. And oh yeah, I almost forgot about Metal Gear Solid 3 with the cure and camouflage menu, as well as looking at your weapons as well. You can even change the lighting of the background as well as Snake's overall appearance and colour. I like to think of it as a cool little photo mode, perfect for thumbnails. And since it's on the PS2 emulator, it makes the models in better resolution. I'll leave the link for you guys if you have PC. On the Equip Style menu, you can even view some character sketches by Yoji Shinkawa. A lot, of course, all resembling the Snake we know and love. But one picture of them all stuck out to me, and it was Snake wearing a penguin costume. I don't know why Snake would need that, but I imagine it would have been an unlockable at the end of MGS2. It's definitely a homage to Kojima's first game, known as Penguin Adventure in 1986, a sequel to the Konami game known as Antarctic Adventure. After doing a bit of digging and finding a Shinkawa interview, it turns out that this was meant to allow Snake to stay in the water without breathing at all, so he could kinda stay underwater. Raiden's character model had an interesting design before the final result, notably the details of his face and his hairstyle being slightly different, and most of these were likely test models before the most highly detailed character model we come to know. You can tell the level of polygons I've mentioned are just a lot of like the games that came out during the early 2000s. The outfit layouts are different from Model 1 and Model 2, Model 2 being closer to the final suit Raiden wears, as the first model lacks the watch that Raiden eventually wears. The final result of Raiden's model really looks incredibly fleshed out. Once again, you can equip accessories you find in the game or when you've completed MGS2 under certain circumstances, such as wigs and glasses.
Snake Eater.
Flicking through, you get a closer look at the scuba suit, and you can actually see Raiden's eyes through the goggles. And on Yoji Shinkawa's sketches, you can see the iterations of the suit, with one mask design looking like a samurai helmet. And according to Yoji Shinkawa in the official art book interviews, the underwater rebreather mask was intentionally inspired by ninjas biting a scroll in their mouths during magic transformations, blending ancient mysticism with sci-fi aesthetics. Moving on, we have Raiden in the Grlukovich uniform that allows you to equip your AK, but not the balaclava, ironically. Then yep, we have Naked Raiden, trying to hide the fact that he has no genitals because he's a robot. Funnily enough, originally in the sketches and early story concepts, Raiden was meant to be revealed as a cyborg in the Arsenal Gears sequence, with a triangular patch on his chest giving the game's plot away, that he was always a robot. This idea would arise again in MGS4, but of course, in a more cooler fashion. Some rumours go around that Raiden was also meant to be a woman, given on his feminine style, but it's never confirmed because his looks was this way to actually appease to the female audience, as Yoji Shinkawa expressed. There's also another photograph of what appears to be Raiden in some trouble and Snake coming to his aid, which is actually pretty cool, perhaps maybe a scrap story design that was meant to happen when Raiden got injured. There's even artwork of Raiden touting a shotgun with what appears to be some sort of holographic sight on top of it. According to Yoji Shinkawa, he originally envisioned Raiden wielding a shotgun. Of course it never happens because you can't actually get a shotgun in-game. Up next is Pliskin, and ironically he has a different character model page instead of being a part of Snake's one. Maybe this is a hint that Pliskin is an imposter? The character models are cool, as usual, with the Navy SEAL getup and M4 rifle, but most interestingly is what is in the sketches. Yoji Shinkawa originally was going to give Snake blonde hair, just like his brother Liquid. Now at the start of MGS1's briefing, some have speculated that Snake always had blonde hair. But then again, it could be just the way the lighting makes it look. Interestingly, in the art book conversation, Yoji implies when asked why was Snake and Pliskin's hair colour very different, Yoji says that Snake's hair might be blonde naturally and that in MGS1 he most likely used dye. The MGS community often bicker about this, implying that Snake always had darker hair since the MSX games, and since Snake is Hideo Kojima's idea and character, that's how he originally intended to look. It's interesting to note before Yoji Shinkawa got involved with MGS, Solid Snake's character model or artwork was based on Mel Gibson. Only up and when Shinkawa joined Konami around 94 to 95. He brought a fresh artistic take that reshaped the series as we know. But honestly, this one is up to you guys to decide, but it's more than likely Snake always had his father's hair colour, as implied in MGS4, and Liquid his mother's. Now I'm not going to be showcasing every character model, I'm just going to be bringing to your attention things that I think are pretty valuable to tell you about in terms of backstory and some original designs behind some of the most prominent characters, but I will leave the links down below if you want to go check them out. So next is Colonel Campbell, and his character model is very similar to that of his Metal Gear Solid 1 codec feature. But if you actually look at the details, you can see that his arms and legs and all the rest of it are missing, because I think they only wanted the top half of him to make it present in the codec feature. Still pretty cool though how we see him in all of his military getup, looking like a true commander. He's even got the Foxhound patches on as well from before his time there, training Foxhound, Big Boss's former unit. And yeah, all round it just looks really cool, but you can tell his design's based on Richard Crenna from Rambo. So this is actually Vamp's early character model. If we look at his blades, they look kind of similar to the Kodachi blades, giving it an Eastern twist with like the military style knife. There's similarities between the original model, but in reality he doesn't look anything like Vamp. In fact, he kind of looks like his long lost cousin. But in my mind, I just kept thinking he looked like a character out of Mulan. I don't know why. But in contrast to his earlier model, you can see him, he's much more fleshed out, he has like a personalised Bowie knife rather than two, and carries a selection of different throwing knives that we often see him use in the game. It's interesting to note as well that Vamp has gone through many different iterations of his character design, and at one point he was even actually going to be a female. I couldn't find anything on the art book interview with Shinkawa really talking about Vamp's earlier designs. I mean, he just goes into it briefly, but you can tell in the early photos that he was intended to be a woman. Plus there's even a rough sketch of what appears to be Vamp dressed up as like a pharaoh-style Egyptian character, with knives on the end of his fingertips, which is really cool. It would have been epic to see some early model design in the character view menu. So Fortune was planned from the start to be black, as was her father, Scott Dolph. Her changes were more cosmetic, straight to curly hair, a jacket to a tactical one piece, then a one piece with fishnets to just a regular one. Her look and her look came largely from Shinkawa, though Kojima got her name from a fortune cookie, and apparently she was meant to have a supply of them in the game, along with a saxophone that she played during cutscenes. It's more than likely the saxophone theme we hear every time Fortune arrives would have been what she'd have been playing. She was also originally meant to have a blood disease that Vamp would treat by erotically biting her neck from behind. She's gone through numerous different designs, from typical formal wear such as a plain US Navy top, as well as a coat with shades on, and by the looks of it she was going to have dark hair rather than blonde. Also in one of the photos you can actually see she was meant to carry a pistol as well. And the original design for the railgun looks like it was meant to be a heavy machine gun instead. Sadly, there's no previous models to view, but you can really see the level of detail and care they put into making Fortune look menacing and sexy. Ocelot also had an interesting design concept too. Originally, instead of Liquid's arm that possessed him, he was meant to have a cybergenetic prosthetic one. Who knows how the story could have played out, but maybe at the time Kojima wasn't planning on getting Liquid involved again, but I guess he ended up missing him too much. But what we do know is that this idea does come into effect in MGS4 when Ocelot ditches Liquid's arm for a prosthetic one. Rosemary changed roles throughout the development. She started off as a news anchor captured amongst the other hostages on the Big Shell, and her appearance would have been so alien that Raiden would wonder if it was her. Then she was to be adapted to be Raiden's girlfriend who would crop up on the Colonel's codec, similar to Naomi Hunter in MGS1. She would have been a blonde, complete with makeup and an open blouse to show that she was clothing herself deliberately to Raiden's taste as a Patriot spy. By the end, she would have reverted to her actual brunette look. She still says she's changed her eye and hair colour to match Raiden's profile in the final game.
No matter where I go, I get used.
I reinvented myself to suit your tastes. Hairstyle, clothes, the way I moved, things I talked about. You say you love the color of my hair, my eyes. They're not even real.
So perhaps she was a natural blue-eyed blonde to begin with, or maybe a redhead. We never actually see a pre-Raiden to actually know if that's the case. And originally she was meant to have her own codec frequency, not just to save the game for you. But that role was meant to go to a character called Maxine or Max, a work, chirpy tech girl who also would tell you how to use the radar and other gadgets and how they would work. Basically the same as Mei Ling, only she'd quote Shakespeare instead of proverbs.
Snake, wouldn't now be a good time to save your mission?
What's going on?
And Raiden would have also been aided over the codec by Dr. William Doc Wilson, a maths genius who designed the AI for Arsenal Gear. Now, he's not incorporated into this document, but I thought I'd mention it regardless. This is a part of some additional intel, should we say, behind the development of MGS2. But yeah, anyway, so this would mean that he'd give Raiden advice about AI tech as well as marine wildlife and the environment, making him like an MGS2 version of Master Miller. He would later serve as the basis for Dr. in Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance.
But first you need to take a dump.
Wait, what?
A dump?
So for Solidus, there's no sources I can pull from that explains about his early concept designs, which makes sense because Solidus was created in MGS1, so Kojima most likely had a good idea on how his character would appear, and since he's a clone of Big Boss, they pretty much had the characters modelled down. Interestingly though, in Yoji's artwork we can see a few iterations of his power suit from the tame and straight up mech style. In the illustration, the suit actually looks way more thick, and instead of a katana, Solidus looks like he's wielding a knife or a long blade. He even has the ponytail like Venom Snake in one picture, and in the other, he has like spikes on his shoes similar to the Tengu. He went through several cool designs as seen throughout these illustrations, but ultimately ended up being the one that we know, almost like the Dr. Octopus-esque style bad guy with the long tentacle arms. Peter Stillman, the bomb explosive expert, went through some designs, as well as originally in one photo he was meant to be way younger with hair. And the name Peter Stillman comes from the book City of Glass, which if you do a little bit of research into it, you'll actually find it has its similarities to MGS2's narrative. Though this wasn't always the case with Peter Stillman. He was originally called Ed, another reference to a character in Police Notes who also dealt in bombs. But they did use that name Ed in MGS4 for one of Meryl's team members in the Rat Patrol. When it comes to Metal Gear Solid 2, a lot has changed during development, but some of the most interesting cuts were the villains. The group we know as Dead Cell, they were originally called Black Cell, and instead of a trio, they were meant to be a full 5-person team. Their trademark look was dark sunglasses across the board. Very early 2000s. One of the biggest lost characters was someone named Chinaman. You've probably heard of this concept before. Problematic name aside, the concept was wild. He was supposed to be a Vietnamese man raised in China, carrying a deep grudge against America and New York specifically, which makes sense in that turbulent time period of, 9/11 and the disastrous effects and the events of the Iraq War. Apparently he could run on water and swim at insane speeds, a bit like Vamp, and he even had a dragon tattoo that would come to life during the battle. He was meant to be fast, deadly, and heavily inspired by Jet Li, so naturally he was also a master of Kung Fu and Qui-Gon. If any of that sounds familiar, it should, because most of his mechanics were eventually recycled into Vamp. And in fact, the section where you fight Vamp in the Shell 2 core, that was originally designed for Chinaman. Vamp wasn't supposed to appear until much later in the game, in an area that was described as a kind of temple inside Arsenal Gear. Now, the other scrap character was even stranger. He was called Old Boy, most likely another name you've heard before as well, or sometimes just called Old Man. They're not very, creative with these, video game character ideas, are they? Let's be honest. I mean, look at Death Stranding. The idea that he was apparently meant to be 100 years old, an ex-Nazi general who helped develop military hand-to-hand combat and was supposed to be Big Boss's original mentor. I mean, I guess that's kind of good that it didn't turn out to be the case, because, yeah, an ex-Nazi trainer, that's not exactly a badge of honour. But anyway, he'd have shown up in MGS2 to fight Raiden with a Panzerfaust, basically an anti-tank rocket because, well, why not? Needless to say, between a Nazi war criminal and a slur-based character name, Konami probably made the right call by scrapping both. I mean, it probably wouldn't have carried the weight that it would have by using someone like the boss from MGS3. But what's cool is that their DNA didn't vanish entirely. Old Boy's concept was clearly split into two, East and West. Just kidding. His age and legendary sniper skills became the end in MGS3, and his role as a mentor to Big Boss was passed on to the beloved boss that we come to know, who ended up being one of Kojima's best written characters. But yeah, apparently Metal Gear Solid is absolutely terrible when it comes to representation of women. But let's not go down that route. But anyway, as for Chinaman, we may not have seen him, but Vamp absolutely inherited his supernatural flair and combat style. Looking at the concepts for Chinaman compared to Vamp, it's clear to see why they chose Vamp. There's even a brief moment in MGS2 where Vamp mourns an unnamed Dead Cell member, possibly a subtle nod to Chinaman still being canon in the game in some early form. In the end, Dead Cell in MGS2 was a bit more grounded than the quirky over-the-top bosses of MGS1, but behind the scenes, Kojima and his team were clearly playing with some truly wild ideas. Interestingly, in the documentation of Metal Gear Solid 2, we get a subtle nod to some of these characters, but unfortunately we don't have no character models because perhaps they didn't make it that far into development. Such a shame, right? If some of you guys remember in Metal Gear Solid Integral, especially in the Japanese exclusive expanded version of the original game, there was like a strange and I'd say easily overlooked feature, sort of like a photo shoot mode, unlocked through VR missions. It let you, spy on characters like Mei Ling and Dr. Naomi in a bare studio space, and you could interact with them and make them do all kinds of poses. As the saying goes, the more things change, the more they stay the same, as we've seen in Death Stranding 2 with its new photo shoot mode. In the documentation of MGS2, we do see Mei Ling make a return, albeit not in a form that was as prevalent as in the integral version in terms of poses. But it's clear to see what gets Yoji Shinkawa going. I mean, he even admits that Mei Ling is the ideal woman for him. So with the model showcase over, I thought I'd take a look at the mechanical units. And there is an array of weaponized vehicles in MGS2 we've seen over the course of the game, and tons of cool sketches from Yoji. Out of them all, I picked the Metal Gear Ray to showcase because there's two models to view, including the prototype we see in the tanker to the mass-produced versions in Arsenal Gear, and there's quite a difference between the two. But then again, if I remember correctly, there's one that's land-based and the other that's meant to be aquatic, so then again it makes sense. Looking through several pages of Yoji Shinkawa's work, the Ray really had some interesting designs, with like winged versions as well. But most interestingly, Ray was meant to represent a T-Rex dinosaur. Either way, they all look incredible, but the final model we got was perfect. And how could I forget about Arsenal Gear, a huge fortress practically the size of a small city, or just a submersible coffin as Solidus said, and our boy is right, but once again Yoji Shinkawa's artwork is where the magic happens, and it is here in the sketches you see the foundation of MGS2's humble beginnings. Arsenal Gear didn't always look like an alien spacecraft. In fact, it had a design very similar to a sea turtle, and even at one point was ground mobile and had legs to move. And you guys know how obsessed Kojima is with whales. I mean, just play some of his games and you'll see it. There was even a design similar to a blue whale with Metal Gear Ray, but with a cool mech twist. Shinkawa is one talented guy. And if that couldn't get any more interesting, you can even see a design that looks just like the DBH Magellan from Death Stranding 2. Everyone talks about the Rex, being an inspiration, and I'm not saying they're wrong, but looking at this artwork, Arsenal Gear and its concepts had the original design, or at least was partly the inspiration. Now we come to a feature called Background, which is mostly all the locations in MGS2 we've already visited. However, this document allows us to use a free camera to explore freely in and out of the world of MGS in New York, from the tanker exterior and interior as well as the plant, most of which I've already covered in my MGS2 Out of Bounds video, but there is a few exceptions here that I think are worth discussing from areas I haven't covered from my previous video, and most importantly, cut areas that sadly we could never explore in the final version. First up is the outskirts of Manhattan, and it's the scene where Solidus and Raiden head for the mainland of New York. There's nothing interesting in terms of hidden assets, but as fans, how can we not love the details, however mundane they may be? It's pretty cool to think that Kojima and team spent a few days in New York going around taking pictures and filming footage in order to be able to reconstruct this into a video game format. Everything from the Verrazano Bridge to the odd untextured buildings and endless land poking our curiosities. Next, there was actually an early concept design for the plant model, and it looks awfully similar and redesigned into the military offshore base to Big Boss's base from Peace Walker and MGS5 before it eventually turned into what we would see it in MGS2. Given on the layout, it looks like it was meant to be Strut E's heliports, which is a key location where you fight Fat Man and disfuse the bombs. It just appears to be the early design of really what it was meant to look like. Even its colour and design was a lot different, resembling more of an oil rig. Next we have the destruction of Arsenal Gear crashing into Manhattan. It's awfully close to the Twin Towers, and of course this was very controversial during the development of Metal Gear Solid 2, with predominantly not allowing to show this scene where Arsenal Gear crashes into the main city of New York, given on what had happened with 9/11, the Twin Towers and terrorist attacks. But this free can gives us a look at the sheer scale of the damage, and looking around there is several buildings that still stand, including the Twin Towers. Lastly, it's said that the character Doc that was removed from the game would have turned up after Raiden encountered Emma. His expertise in marine life would have turned up when you go to the aquarium strut. It would have been hidden at the bottom of one of the struts, most likely strut D originally, which was a command room rather than a sediment pool. and it would have been an optional place to visit, and you could just watch the fish and call Doc for information on them. And you could even use a miniature submarine to explore the seabed and take several photos. Plus, there's a really epic sound feature in this document which allows you to listen to all the in-game music, albeit in many different forms, from alert, caution, and sneaking versions. And then there's items with loads of cool books, ranging from guides or promotional work as well as illustrations. But by far the best thing in this document, in this item section, is looking back on all the old figures released especially around for MGS2 and its characters from Kubrick's or rather Lego toys, which all look epic. And all the way to the McFarlane toys that some of you guys might remember or even own yourself. And they are all pretty well detailed, considering the size of them and for the time. If you collected all the figures, you could build a Metal Gear Ray model, as there were several pieces inside the boxes of different characters, so you really did have to collect them all. I remember being a kid and wanting Metal Gear toys, but they were really expensive. But as I grew older, I really wasn't much of a fan of the features of the McFarlane's figures. I mean, just look what they did to my boy Solid Snake.
No! That is not Solid Snake!
But after emptying my wallet and finding an epic head sculptor who goes by the name of Frank Yeager on Facebook, was a master of sculpting Metal Gear characters in great accuracy. So if any of you guys love model collecting and really want accurate figures, then feel free to check him out, but bear in mind it's not cheap. There is also a special footage feature ranging from every single Metal Gear Solid 2 trailer in existence, including early presentations before the final polished trailers released to the public. Some of these trailers wasn't even released to the public, and in fact only the staff could see some of them, but a lot showcased cut content expected for the game, including segments where originally Snake was going to fight Metal Gear Ray on the tanker. As well as a sneak peek at Raiden and his early character model as we showcased in the latter, and much more. There's even like a making of, basically Kojima and team constructing the game from the ground up. There's even videos ranging from the actor who plays Raiden's motion capture and his experience using such tech, including a video of Kojima Productions team celebrating a long hard development and grind to finalise Metal Gear Solid 2 after receiving a fax letter of approval. MGS2 was truly on its way to the market and would definitely leave a mark in history, as we guys now know. And there's even footage of Kojima Productions' team being in New York and taking all points of inspiration for the backdrop of MGS2 from New York. And there's even like an hilarious lecture from an expert in military squadron tactics that served as a guide to the staff at Konami to capture military takeovers, as we saw in the tanker with the Krlukovic forces and so forth.
基本的に重要なのはチームワークでお互い信用しなかったら話にならないんだよ。どんな作戦があれどうでもいけるわね行こうと。
There's something called Chronicle as well. Just picture a timeline of the development of games of Konami. This is ranging back, of course, from MGS1 and in between MGS2's development and completion. Even a few mentions of Zone of the Enders in there as well. You can even view the staff who are behind the magic of MGS2, from the director Hideo Kojima himself to programmers, lighting effects experts, and just much more. There's even a full story script for those who love some reading, explaining the entire plot of MGS2. And easily one of the most interesting parts of this document is the program section, that explains how these devs put the game together with certain softwares and how they managed to navigate around the PS2's limitation and make the incredible happen. From system structure to enemy soldier AI, essentially this tells us how the game was made with complex programming. And finally, to add the cherry on top of this epic document, it also contains a few VR missions, some we're familiar with from the base game. But by far my favourite is the variety mission as Snake, where you get to rescue Meryl from oncoming soldiers. It's a lot harder than it looks, especially trying to hit moving targets, and also because of the sensitivity of the sniper is very high. You can switch between the lethal and non-lethal snipers, and of course non-lethal giving you a better score. But the idea is to take out the allotted enemies. All I can say is if you grab this document in your MGS2 collection, don't hesitate. It feels like the only thing close we're going to get in terms of being able to experience a pre-build of Metal Gear Solid 2. Which of course a lot of us are really hoping for, because as we know, Konami probably does have some hidden footage elsewhere or cut gameplay. Who knows, if Delta turns out to be a success, maybe it's something they could consider on the MGS2 remake. Anyway guys, thank you very much for watching, don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button. I'll see you on the next one, until we meet again.